welcome to A San Francisco Conservative. I'm Tom Martin, longtime journalist. I've produced stories for ABC News, CBS News, CNN, covered the White House for a year and that kind of thing. And I love having stimulating conversations with interesting individuals. And that's exactly what we do here on A San Francisco Conservative, thanks to my co-host, author David Parker. David joins us for every episode from San Francisco. A San Francisco Conservative is the title of his second book of essays. His first book is Income and Wealth, and his third most recent book is Rome 476. And I always love our conversations. Hey, David, how are you today?
I'm fine. Looking forward to this.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, great to be with you. So it's, I'm, full confession, I am based on the East Coast, but even here on the East Coast, we frequently hear about San Francisco these days. It's not always positive, I have to be very honest. I love San Francisco personally, but one of the things that we hear about in reference to San Francisco is the need for affordable housing. I was out there a few weeks ago to hear your jazz band and to spend some time together. And the taxi driver said, "Yeah, I can't afford to live in this city." So what is the dilemma about affordable housing in San Francisco?
In any major city, New York City too, where housing is very expensive, that's it. It's expensive and you can't make it cheaper. So stop trying to do that, because what they do to make it cheaper is make it uglier and have less features. All the affordable housing, one famous company is called Bridge Housing here in San Francisco. They seem to they have a way of getting the price a little bit down, but it's really ugly. It doesn't fit into this iconic Victorian architecture or other architecture of San Francisco. It really looks like housing projects, and they're putting them in often expensive locations. It's completely wrong. Housing is something the market really can do. A capitalist market definitely can build housing. You don't need government building housing, or you don't need to make nonprofit housing, or you don't need to make affordable housing. It's completely against the whole creative process.
Yeah. So if the current situation in San Francisco is an example of free market economics, are you really saying, hey, to the Silicon Valley millionaires, you can find a place to live here, but if you're in a lower income bracket, you're out of luck, can't live in the city? Is that what you're saying?
You have to label the problem. If the price of housing is too high, the supply of housing is too low, period. San Francisco may build 3,000 or 4,000 units, and the whole Bay Area has the same problem. They're only building a few thousand units, and the demand is 3 or 4 times that. They should be building 10, 15,000 a year. And since they haven't been doing it for so long, they need to build about 300,000 units right now.
Yeah. And I read, David, to jump right in, I love reading your essays. I know many of them often appear in the Epic Times there, the Bay Area edition, and then many of them the national edition. And when I read this essay that you shared with me, I thought your proposal was very revolutionary, shall we say, and had a lot of logic to it. What is your solution instead of like commissioning builders to build quote unquote affordable housing?
I'm saying build expensive housing. The Bay Area is rich, and rich people can't find housing. So build housing where everybody wants to live. We build housing in South Bay or Bayview or outside areas. No one wants to live there. They want to live where everyone wants to live. Telegraph Hill, Russian Hill, Nob Hill, the Sunset, the Richmond. That's around Golden Gate Park. That's where people want to live. I know, I've owned properties and I've seen where my tenants go. They all go in that direction. I had property on Nob Hill and people were leaving because it wasn't a neighborhood. It was hotels, and people come, oh, this is nice. I'll learn about San Francisco. Then I'll find my neighborhood. And they all go to those marina districts. They all go to the best neighborhoods. So build in the best neighborhoods, build 300,000 units, and you'll free up all this middle level housing. There it is, 300,000 affordable units overnight. By building expensive units, And all those tenants who are living in middle units, they can afford the expensive units. And then there you are. Problem solved. Don't build junk. It's really ugly and depressing for the tradespeople. They have skills and they're building the cheapest
Yeah,
possible stuff.
I thought that was an interesting point. Also, here on the East Coast, I know some contractors and home builders, and they would probably be very excited by what you were talking about because, you'd mentioned some projects, if that's the right word, that are eyesores there in San Francisco, but you're encouraging the construction of very upscale housing, and the tradespeople would like that, right?
Right. Imagine you trained your whole life to do carpentry, or you're putting trim, or you're putting fine floors, you're doing kitchen cabinets and stuff. And you say, no, just go to your local Home Depot and buy the cheapest thing you possibly can and put prefabricated siding and very small windows with just all prefab, and cut out any architectural feature, cut out any amenity, get that price down. Completely wrong, uncreative process.
Yeah,
Completely wrong.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And we're not solving the problem by going that cheap way either. We have an affordable housing crisis, and it's been going on for a long time, and there's no solution in sight.
Yeah. And have you seen changes in the real estate field? I mean, how long have you been investing in real estate as well as living right there in San Francisco?
Well, I have a little talent for it. I've taught school my whole life, but every year I purchase real estate. So I have hundreds of units. That's an anomaly, I suppose. Um, I love it. I'm not doing it for profit. I'm doing it for creativity. So, yeah, my thumb is on the pulse of the real estate market in San Francisco. I have 2 offers out now on office buildings. People think I'm nuts, but I'm buying them at 50 cents on the dollar on the mortgage.
And I won't ask you to give away your trade secrets or anything, but are you envisioning new uses for that property? I mean, people, I like what I saw when I visited San Francisco recently. I hadn't been there in a long, long time, but are you, again, I see articles say in the New York Times, which is published near me in my area, and they talk about, the death of America's cities and so on. But you've always been a visionary, really.
I'm watching certain areas. I'm in San Francisco, and I like Union Square. And I was so disappointed during COVID to see the St. Francis Hotel boarded up with plywood, completely covering the front,
Wow.
and nobody walking around except a few homeless. And they had some cafes on Union Square. I used to like to go and sit there and read and write a little bit. And I've been watching it now for 2 years, and it's coming back, and it's coming back. So I'm looking at some property right near Union Square, and I'm just see tourists with backpacks. Okay, this is happening. But
Got
within
it.
5 years, I don't know more than anybody else what to do with office buildings, but except to buy them really cheap and and then see what happens.
Excellent. Well, I love that. I want to talk more about that in a moment. So we will do exactly that. Hello and welcome back to A San Francisco Conservative. I'm Tom Martin, longtime journalist, former producer for ABC News, CBS News, covered the White House and other assignments along the way. And our co-host is author David Parker, joining us from San Francisco, hence the title of our series in our show, a San Francisco Conservative. David is the author of Income and Wealth, a San Francisco Conservative, in his latest book, Rome 476. And we were just talking about the subject of affordable housing. And being an East Coast guy myself, I really love it when government gets involved. And so they're tackling affordable housing. David says he's not that impressed with what they've come up with. And government has also gotten involved in what's called tenants' rights. And David, as a property owner, what do you think about when government gets involved in tenants' rights?
That's a very interesting subject because rent control appears to benefit the tenant. And in the short run, it does. The rent is kept at maybe a long-time tenant has a lower rent and he's kind of protected. I'm not against that because rent control is a symptom of an underlying problem that is far deeper and in favor of landlords. You have rent control because there's not enough apartments. That's supply control. And what does supply control do? When demand is high, it raises prices. So landlords are getting much higher prices for property in San Francisco than they deserve. And that difference is far more than they're losing in a few tenants paying below market rent. So I'm never objecting, and landlords you don't hear landlords objecting because they're coming out ahead. In fact, if I was to give an investment tip, buy property in rent-controlled cities. That's the highest rate of return on any investment in this nation. It's higher than treasuries, higher than the stock market, because it's like Las Vegas. It's like gambling and prostitution. It's illegal. So those are really high profit areas. Rent control is a high profit area.
So those engaged in sketchy professions like that can thank the government for.
Yes, you can thank that's why I vote Democrat, because they do all these anti-market things, and people in business come out way ahead.
We have growing cannabis farms and all kinds of things. Yeah, it's who knew? Anyway, it's interesting with the tenants' rights. There's interesting stipulations about age and about if you can let someone else move into the property and and things like that. And one of your points in your essay that I read about affordable housing that you wrote recently was that it can be advantageous to the person who moves in, but there can also be a downside, right?
Well, if I have a policy, or I try to avoid renting to older people because they may like this apartment, honey, let's stay here and finish out our lives together here.
You're Generation Z yourself, aren't you?
Right. I don't rent to somebody my age. You rent to people who are 22 and younger, because they're going to stay there. And even if the rent is a little bit on the high side, 10 years from now, it won't be high. 20 years from now, it won't be high. 30 years from now, it won't be high. And they're not leaving ever. And in San Francisco, if you're 55, I believe, or at some age, you can't throw them out to move in yourself, because we're protecting tenants. So that's why save for retirement when you can get an apartment in San Francisco?
Yeah,
I have tenants who are older tenants paying $500 a month. They're not leaving.
As the one who puts in the hard work to find worthy properties, and to, you have the ingenuity and the experience to talk to those bankers. I love what you've told me, over our many conversations about how you work with bankers, and what is your number one principle? I think you shared that with me about when you're buying new property.
Well, I'm generally what's called a leveraged buyout investor. I'll get the project fully financed. The bank doesn't quite know that, but it doesn't look that way when I present it to the bank. I'm putting a big down payment or whatever they want to see. But when the dust settles, I wasn't putting a down payment. The seller is turning back the whole thing.
I hope there are no bankers listening to this conversation. But anyway, but I mean, as the one going through all that.
Actually, a banker once who I made that scenario with, and 5 years later, I saw him. He owned a hot dog stand in San Francisco. I guess he didn't last as a banker. And I told him, the deals that we did had nothing to do with how I presented them. He says, yeah, I figured that out afterward. That's why I'm selling hot dogs.
Oh my God, that's very funny. That's very funny. But you don't, do you not mind when, the tenants move in? You've probably owned some of your buildings and tenant, residents, properties, residential properties for a length of time. You don't mind it when people move in for 30 years?
I don't, I don't, because it's that symptom again. The property is worth much more than it would be were it not rent control. That's how the market compensates in some respect. Okay, the tenants come in, they benefit short, and the landlords benefit long. Yeah. So it's all right. I'm not complaining. I'm not a vicious landlord.
I would think not. I would think not. That being a jazz musician and all that, I can't imagine that. But so is this a good or a bad example of when government gets involved in a challenge? I mean, again, your 3 books of essays and your many featured columns in the Epic Times, you're talking, when we're talking about healthcare or the quality of education or something like that, I tend to think that when you've told us that when the government gets involved, it's a disaster. But what about this case?
It has to be a disaster in every case because the government is not, they're not builders, they're not doctors, they're not, they're nothing. They're employees, they're bureaucrats. They can't do these things. Karl Marx thought that would be great if the workers took over the factories, took over the means of production, because that huge profit would go to them and raise their standard of living. But that's like asking the stagehands to play in the orchestra. Workers are not interested and are not put in the time to learn the creative aspects of entrepreneurialism, of investment. That's a skill. You can't just pass that on. We had 2 not great, but 2 politicians in this nation who didn't do well, Arnold Schwarzenegger and Donald Trump. They hadn't paid their dues as politicians. They walked in as like stagehands. I'm going to run the country. I'm going to run the state. And they ran into all kinds of walls where they had no preparations. They hadn't learned the craft of being a politician. They couldn't do it.
Love that analogy. We will talk more about that. Thank you. This is a San Francisco Conservative, conversations between yours truly, Tom Martin, longtime journalist, having produced for ABC News, CBS News, covered the White House for public television, and my co-host, author David Parker. And we call it a San Francisco Conservative because that's the title of David's second book. He has 3 great books of essays, Income and Wealth, A San Francisco Conservative, and Rome 476 is his latest. And you can also read David's writing in the Epic Times, the San Francisco edition, and often the national edition. And be sure to catch us if you're in the San Francisco area on KSFO radio. And you can also catch KSFO radio and our show online. So welcome back, David. And one thing you said earlier in our conversation caught my attention. You are the author of A San Francisco Conservative, and you just let the cat out of the bag that you voted Democratic. What's up with that?
I was making a joke. I was being facetious because Democrats create tremendous business opportunity, tremendous investment opportunity, because government programs are such a distortion of the market. And if you're a professional investor, you can't go wrong. I think I may have said as an investment tip, invest in rent controlled cities. Well, those are Democrat controlled cities. So, yeah, I want those Democrats because they don't build. And if you don't build, the price of housing keeps rising much higher than the loss of rent from some few low paying tenants. So it was a joke.
Yeah, and you'd probably agree with me that the Democrats have, are great at implementing solutions. If we have a problem about healthcare, if we have a problem about poor education, if we any problem there is, the Democrats seem to have, a lot of great solutions. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, yes. But what's not being said, even like going back to housing, if the government or the city builds affordable housing, where does the money come to build it? They're not going to really raise taxes significantly to do that. In fact, they're going to, well, in fact, they will. That's the problem. But it'll be indirect. Property taxes will somehow get pushed. Other programs will be cut. They'll begin incentives for builders. They'll waive property tax for them, but someone's going to pay for that. And that's the middle class, the people who want the affordable housing. They're going to get a little break on rent, and their taxes are going to go up more than the break they're getting on the rent because it has to be paid for. It's so wrong in every way that they should stop thinking in terms of affordable housing,
Yeah.
build expensive housing, and free up all affordable housing at no charge.
Yeah, no, that I love that innovative solution. Exactly. Another thing that surfaced in this conversation today is the whole idea of people who are professionals who really are committed to engaging in a profession. You were a teacher there in the public schools of San Francisco for 40 plus years, teaching music and so on. And earlier you'd mentioned that, it's kind of like delegating something to the stagehands. And so I'm thinking about professions and, can you tell us what why that is really meaningful for you?
Well, a profession is meaningful because there's only a few professions. The arts are, if you're an artist, you're a profession. If you're an athlete, you're a professional, an actor. And in certain fields, school teaching is a profession. And my definition is a profession is any field where as you mature in life, you can bring everything you learn to the craft, to your field. Most jobs are not professions. You can learn them in 6 months or a few years, and you don't go any further. You improve as a human being, but there's nothing you can bring to the job. But you can teach first grade, and I know many schools, the first grade teachers have taught that for the 40 years. And every year they do it better and more efficiently, and the students learn more with more joy because it's already a profession. And so I taught school because I really enjoyed it, and I take that approach to my jazz. I have some of probably the best musicians in San Francisco. We headlined the Fillmore Jazz Festival a few times, and I play every week someplace.
Yeah,
With
and
great musicians. That's my approach. It's my approach.
For our audience in the Bay Area, where can they catch your jazz?
Well, the most fun gig I have at the moment is called Bear Bottle Brewery in Bernal Heights, a very young millennial attracted neighborhood. And there's a huge environment, and there's dogs and children running around, and there's mothers nursing in the back room, and there's kids playing shuffleboard, and the band has a stage there, and we play contemporary jazz. I mean, difficult composers, Eric Dolphy and Ornette Coleman, the real stuff. So, my approach is completely improvisational all the way through. No musician is allowed to repeat a solo he did last week, constantly new, like a first grade teacher, constantly improving as a profession.
Yeah, I love
And in
that.
business, I'm the same way. I completely creative at all times.
Yeah. No, I love that quality. And again, we're talking about stagehands and the construction trade and so on, the teachers. I'm reminded this seems to be, again, I got my start covering politics in Washington, D.C. for CBS News. So there was the Reagan years at that point. But I've seen some concerning headlines, at least I think they're concerning, but maybe it's just evolution, that some of these unions, teachers, builders, and so on, stagehands perhaps, are kind of migrating away from the Democratic Party. Do you think that the Democratic Party can kind of turn things around?
No,
No. Okay. Can you elaborate on that?
this is their moment because the Republicans are not putting up good candidates, and this is the time for the Democrats to seize it. And they're not because they're so removed from the nation. The Democrats represent coastal elites who are thinking in really socialist terms. Let's put the best, most qualified people in charge and use the most scientific methods to create the society, the community we all want. Life doesn't work that way, so they're completely off in the wrong direction, and the working class doesn't know what they're talking about. But the nation is a middle class and it's working class, and they're all voting. They're holding their nose, and they're going to vote for Donald Trump. He's got it in the bag.
Wow. Well, as a resident of Connecticut, I don't really know what you're talking about, but so we just have a short time left. I want to thank everybody for joining us for another episode of A San Francisco Conservative, again named for the second of David's 3 books of essays, first being Income and Wealth, and the third being Rome 476. You can learn more about all those books and about David himself, including the jazz, on davidparkeressays.com. And is it Dave Parker Sextet.com
Yes.
for the jazz? And in 30 seconds, you want to add anything about your books, David?
Well, all my books have two things uniting them. One is that the founding fathers got it right, and why are we going off in another direction? What's with this liberal interpretation of the Constitution? And then there's another point. Forget.
Well, minimal government and the I love what you've written about the power of the individual and kind of, again, free market economics and trust human ingenuity and entrepreneurship. That's what I get out of your books. As well as, of course, as a longtime journalist, I appreciate that you give context, which my friends who are journalists, they never provide context, but we can find it in your book.
That's the second thing, is that I give historical context, examples from history of all the problems we're facing and how they were solved in the past by more sophisticated civilizations. 5th century Athens, 1st century Rome was a much, much higher civilization than we are today.
I love it. I love it. Well, it's always a pleasure, and look forward to connecting with you again. Thank you all for joining us. This is A San Francisco Conservative, and we will see you next time.